right, so this next part is one that it's likely you'll have 3 to 5 questions just on this particular topic right here. Let's go through and take a look at it. Many of us are familiar with security policies. You know, if we go back and just take a look at implementing the NIST control, usually we have to have a policy that tells the auditor how we're implementing each of the controls and then the procedures that we're using to actually implement the controls. And so you have something that says this is how we do it, and then you have something that says this is how we implemented it, and show the proof is in the pudding. We trust you, but we verify. And you know, from a super high level, this can be things like the acceptable use policy. You know, maybe an AUP could be for all of us lay people on whatever network we're trying to access. This could be the AUP. And that'll define the behavior of people regarding the use of the organization's resources. And by develop any of these policies, it really gives us a position that we can then lean on to adhere or try to comply through our organization. And so when we're implementing these policies, we can have either a top-down policy or a bottom-up. And so one would be super vague, try to cover everything, right? And so that's the top-down, where we would just, at super high level, we would look at it from a CYA. And then the bottom-up typically would be much more granular. You know, whenever we're trying to cover all of our bases specifically. And so, as organizations grow in time and size, these can become very, very important to keep the honest person honest. One thing that you usually will see on the exam is this word right here, security baseline, or like a baseline control. Not to be confused with where people dunk from in basketball, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks, pro basketball, the baseline. But it's the minimum level of security. That's what a baseline is that you have to meet. And so think about that for your systems that you're dealing with. If it's a CIA and you're implementing a low, then it's likely the minimum level of security is going to be 400 different controls and 1,200 procedures to actually implement that, right? If it moves up the food chain, so the low water mark is going to be moderate, it's likely you're going to move up to double that very, very quickly. And then, as the watermark continues to rise here, those controls and those implementations will also rise accordingly. Because as you add more controls, there's going to be more ways you need to implement them. And so that security baseline becomes important because it's basically what's the bare minimum that you need to do. And so if you think about like 6 or 7 years ago, DFARS and the DFARS clauses were becoming very, very important. And now we've started to see the NIST 800-171. And anybody that's doing any business development or contract support, if you're reading any of that stuff for contracts, you're going to start seeing here in the next 18 months or so, what is the CMMC implementation as well. So has somebody done a self-assessment of their CMMC posture? And if so, then you need to show how you're adhering to that by not only having the policies, but having the procedural implementation with proof that you can show an auditor just in case that happens. So at a high level, know what security baseline is, because it's likely that you will see that on the exam. One thing is for sure is that if you're doing anything with any of these topics that we talked about, so policies, standards, guidelines, and procedures, if you're doing anything with that or anything with the security frameworks, it's likely that this next slide is something that is a love-hate relationship for you, the documentation. Because the documentation is typically what takes the longest within the organization. I've been on assessments before where I have been the security control assessor, a liaison for the Army. And people have paid for us to come on site. And when they paid for us to come on site to do the assessment, it's kind of whack because you would think that they have all their ducks in a row. But what we've seen is, or at least what I've seen over time, is that these organizations will try to do the minimal amount of work in order to get the maximum benefit. And I say that because I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but for me at least, I think at a high level, if you are just using templates and trying to pass off the template for showing that you've actually implemented things, it's likely you're going to go up against me for an audit and you're going to lose because just like my kids, I could tell that you ChatGPT'd something or you use the template where it says put company name here. And what's weird is that we follow quite a few organizations that will come in and do an assessment after somebody else has been in there and done an assessment. And what's weird is that we actually will see things like that come into play with specifically templates being used where they provide the auditor the documentation, but it's still in template form, which is kind of embarrassing for that organization because they still got to pay us, and then they probably will have to pay again for a non-interested third party to come out and do the assessment. So why is that important? Well, you need to show specifics, and typically procedural documents are step-by-step how-to documents to implement something. I remember, when I first was out of college, my boss at financial company that I worked for, he said that he'd like for me to make a procedural document on how to make a photocopy, so how to use the copy machine. And I looked at him, I was thinking, you don't know how to use the copy machine? And the naive approach was what I was thinking. I later found out that my 3 sentences that I gave him on a half a sheet of paper was not as robust or verbose that he was looking for. And then later on, when I was at SAIC, one of my mentors said, what separates an expert engineer from a good engineer is how well their documentation is. And I see that all the time. I don't know if you guys see it, but how well people document, how well they can explain things using good understanding of the English language is super important, because most of the time, if we went out to lunch and everybody got hit by a bus, if we came back and tried to figure out where somebody was at a project, we'd have a difficult time to do that. So at a high level here, understand what the procedures are, understand what a guideline is. It's basically a recommendation, a guideline. You don't have to adhere to it. There's 2 more here that I thought that you probably should take a note. A security policy statement by leadership typically is the giveaway. Usually this will couple tightly the baseline, which is the minimum level of security, and then the standard. documents that outline the rules and maybe the what happens if you don't do it. And so at a high level, try to understand that because it's important.